our next speaker, Steve Poole. Steve has a master's degree in business admin. He's also a chartered corporate member of CIPD and a member of the Information Age Forum of the British Computer Society. But he's not been connected with computers all his working life. He's been in IT, working with IT organisations for the past decade and a little longer. But prior to that, his background was working in the engineering sector. We're going to hear from a man whose business is taking people to where they need to be through effective leadership and management of their people. Steve Poole.
Thank you. Sounds very grand. First of all, for the first couple of pages, I'm going to refer to my notes because one competence that seems to be going away from me is to remember, in terms of detail, what I'm going to be talking about. So I hope you'll forgive me for doing that. I'm very much an organisational and personal development specialist, that's what I think. That's what I've been doing for the last few years. I started to work in IT in the year 2000, and over the course of my sort of work, I've had various different nirvana moments. And those of you who were in the first session today might well remember that learning carries on, and you continue. You build on what you've already learned, and I believe competence is about doing some of that. You build on what you've already learned, and suddenly something will hit you. And if you sound like me, when something hits you get very excited. And I'm very excited about this, and I'm very excited about the work that I've done over certainly the last 12 months with an engineering company that makes products that are used throughout the communication side of government. And what I've actually done and achieved, and what I'm going to talk to you about, is about how we've sort of gathered that together and begun to think about how competencies are developed, but not necessarily highlighting the competencies, but highlighting the processes. Because that was one of my nirvana moments in terms of the delivery. In order to deliver, you need to use processes. People are more familiar with processes than they are with competencies. And if you can actually relate that, you really do begin to engage the people who you are working with. So that's basically what I'm going to be talking about. And while I'm going through it as well, I'd like you to think about how your organisation is aligned. Is IT aligned with HR, with finance, and with all of the others? And what advantages would there be if it were? Think about how leadership has devolved down to the organisation to actually bring it together. Think about whether your organisation has a common purpose. And think about how that can actually be brought together and how you could use competencies and processes in order to bring that about and make your organisation strong. Focus on organisational delivery, because I've certainly looked at and worked with organisations. When you start to talk about competencies, the glaze comes over. Go away and develop your leadership and management competencies. Yeah, what does that mean? And certainly when I was talking to some groups of engineers and I tried to talk to them about core competencies, what's that got to do with me? You're talking absolute garbage. Get out of here. We did presentations across the organisation and the organisation I'm referring to has got 600 employees, of which about 400 are engineers. And I could probably name on one hand the number of people who were actually actively using the core competencies at that stage. There was precious little engagement. They were all doing their jobs, but not necessarily connected. So really, if you remember nothing else at the end of this, think about delivery, because that's what competency development is about. It's about enabling your organisation to deliver what it needs to deliver. And what I actually found out is if you focus in on that, people become connected to it and they see it as being something real rather than something nebulous that doesn't mean anything to them. So I'm going to talk about what we did. I'm going to talk about frameworks and families, and I'm going to talk about processes. I'm going to talk about context and putting the competencies into context, and I'm going to finish off with the benefits. Now, when Don phoned me a week last Monday and asked me whether I could actually stand in and do this presentation, I immediately said yes, and then I thought, okay, what am I going to talk about? He also said, right, what you've got to do is fit in with the learning points that the previous speaker was actually going to deliver, and you've also got to align with Andy. So I sat back and went to my shed in the garden and thought, okay, how am I going to do this? And then I realised, and what I actually have done in effect to put this presentation together, is to reflect on what I have done over the last 12 months and how we've actually moved the organisation forward, and say a little bit about the fight and where we are now, because we haven't finished, but I think we've begun to get a very clear engagement. We started off, as I've talked about, looking at core competencies and beginning to think about how core competencies could be used. We took those from another organisation because they fitted what we did. And throughout the whole of this, as we developed all of these competencies, we borrowed and plagiarised a lot of stuff, because I think the point that Andy made, don't try and reinvent the wheel. Look at what your organisation does and look at what competencies it requires. The list on the left is the core competencies, which are the usual core competencies: communication, influencing, leadership, and the other sets. We're an engineering organisation, so what we actually did was engage the organisation in developing an organisational specific engineering competence. We used the IET industry standard as a guide, but basically the competency takes us from requirements management through to transfer to business as usual. So that actually describes all of the engineering processes. Each of those processes can be performed at 4 different levels. And what we did, we said to the engineers, okay, what do you do? What are the different levels? And we got engagement by actually asking them what the engineering competencies they needed, what they needed to describe, and the levels that they needed to describe. And what that actually gave us, in an engineering community, a fairly sceptical engineering community of about 400 people, they got engaged with it. They understood it. It meant something to them. They could actually see their jobs described in it. And you know what? That engineering competence described the product development life cycle, because that's what they do. They go from requirements right through to business as usual, with all of the stuff that goes in behind. So the comprehensive competency that describes all of that. We took the IT framework, SFIA4, because why invent the wheel when we've got something that works? We took the APM program and project management framework, identified what was important amongst that, and developed that. The knowledge and information framework we took from the government knowledge and information framework, that we actually had to put together a finance and acquisitions framework that fitted our own organisation, because taking it from the accountants and the procurement wouldn't have worked and wouldn't have resonated with our staff, so we actually plagiarised that. We took the HR framework, and that's already there. The CIPD have got it. Incidentally, I forgot to mention, I said it, I don't know whether I've written it down here. If you want to have a look at alignment and shaping the future, I can recommend the CIPD website, and just go to the CIPD website and put Shaping the Future in. There's a very good piece of research that talks about alignment. I really do urge you to have a look at that. It will resonate. And then we looked at facilities management, and again, we took that from a professional framework. Having done that, we then realised, and it wasn't necessarily a strong Nirvana moment, but we realised we have a group of families. So we have an engineering family, we have a program and project management family, an IT family, and then a business support family that covers those areas, because we're an engineering organisation. Most important thing to us is engineering, and the top one is hugely important. The rest of them support that business. And within each of those families, we have a career path that takes you through from entry to the sort of top of the tree. And the top of the tree is different depending on the particular family, and depending very much directed to business need. So we've got the competencies, we've got the career families, and we began to again involve people in that. For example, all of those frameworks were verified by the heads of profession, or the people within the organisation and involved in the staff. So all of this process was going on and getting engagement and getting involvement. And that was beginning to help. It really was. And people were beginning to use it. Now, the thing that we then thought about was, and this was where I talked about alignment. I was working on the competency and skills framework work. There was a group of people over here who were working on processes within the organisation, examining the processes. And then there was somebody else over here who was working on workforce planning. But we weren't talking to each other. We were all doing this work, beavering away, without necessarily linking together. And I happened, and the alignment happened by accident, because I happened to be talking to the people who were actually doing the work, the process stuff, And they'd come up with delivery as a process, and that involved what you can see up there. It also involved delivery support, and these are all organisational processes that they had actually mapped independently without necessarily telling anybody else about it. Because they were doing an analysis of the organisation. I'm sure it would have come together in the end, but the work I was doing on competencies linked in and helped that process. And we suddenly came together, and suddenly the competency framework work that I was doing formed a catalyst for the other stuff to come together. So parts of the organisation were talking to each other, and not only that, talking to each other, but working together and clearly understanding the benefits that could be accrued. And all these three people they'd got the commitment from the top of the shop in the organisation. They'd got that high level commitment. They were working in projects, but those projects weren't brought together. So, I've mentioned alignment a lot. It really is something that I believe is crucially important within organisations. Alignment and common purpose. Because when you work in an organisation, you're all looking to work in exactly the same direction. So think about that very, very strongly. So those are the delivery support functions and the delivery support processes. And if you think about the previous slide, people will be able to relate to that. People will be able to see themselves in that. And people seeing themselves in what's going on in the organisation is crucial. It's stating the blindingly bloody obvious, but does it happen? So delivery support was there. We've then got business development, which is another function. We're a manufacturing organisation who makes products and we put them into a marketplace. For that, we have to think about business development. And then the last group of processes we have is corporate governance. So what we've actually described in those 4 slides is everything that is going on within the organisation. Every member of staff will be able to see part of what they do within that. You've got a link to the competency, to the sort of organisation, because the presentation is about delivering competencies and going through the business and helping to support it. And to some extent, I had a nirvana moment when I actually realised, having looked at the workforce planning stuff, which involved every member of staff, looked at the processes, and we were struggling as to how to link what the organisation did to those competencies. Thought, okay, well, how about having and coming up with a straightforward idea that rather than not just developing competencies, developing business process effectiveness through competency development. Because at the end of the day, I believe that's what you're actually looking to do by doing this. It is about helping the business to become more effective and developing those processes. The alternative would be developing competencies through the development of business effectiveness. Members of staff, I believe, want to do their job well, want to be rewarded effectively for what they're actually doing, but very often aren't particularly sure what it is that they're there to do. I've worked with a lot of organisations, and one of the first questions I ask them is, exactly what is it that you do? Exactly what skills do you actually need to do it as the follow-up? But when I ask them exactly what it is that they do, I've had or seen goldfish impressions where they just sit in front of you, opening and closing their mouths. And that's, for me, that's reasonably good, because I know exactly what the task is, and I've done it before, and I can help the organisation through it. It's also quite nice when you ask that question and you go away, and then they come back, and you go back the following day, and they tell you exactly what it is that they do, and then you can really begin to think about, okay, what are the processes that they need, and then what are the competencies? And I think it is important that development is linked directly to the development of the organisation's ability to deliver, and I come across that word deliver again, because that's what we're into. Organisations these days have to deliver as effectively as they possibly can, and as efficiently as they possibly can, and I believe looking at this and using competencies is a very good way that all of us can help with that, and trainers specifically, or people in the area of development, I believe if they actually provide that focus on what the organisation delivers, people begin to really get hold of what you're there for, because it really does directly link your work to their work and to what the organisation is there to do. They do it more effectively, they do it more efficiently, and therefore it improves and has a direct effect on the bottom line. which at the end of the day we're always asked as trainers to think about and to focus on. So, my version of Andy's slide set. Because what I've actually done within the organisation I'm talking about is do exactly what Andy's laid out before. And I'm here to say that does work. The approach does work. Because what this is a slight variation on what Andy talked about, but there's an element of the divine phase first. And I'll go on to talk about what each of those are. Then assess the individual competencies. Then think about the development plan, and then review the success. And I meant to start off by saying I'm not going to say anything in this presentation that is new. We all know this. You might well be sitting there, well, yes, okay, but we know this. However, it is about how you actually link and actually do it, because a lot of us, certainly people who are my colleagues in HR, know exactly what they need to get the organisations to do. The struggle is to actually go ahead and do it. And what I'm going to talk about in the next couple of slides is how we went about it. So if we look at the definition phase, or the sort of the way that we start to think about this, the processes are on the left-hand side, and you'll see delivery support, business development, corporate governance. The bit on the left is an example of the elements that are in our job descriptions. Our job descriptions are relatively simple in terms of we've got the job title, we've got structural or pool. Now, the differentiation between those two is the other thing that we started to do was think about, okay, we have people who develop. They move through, they come into a particular level within an organisation. If the development is working well, they will develop skills. Prior to the work we did, the only way that they could actually develop to the next grade was by applying for an internal advert, an internal VN, so that you couldn't actually get an element where they could actually develop going through it. They had to wait. It was a sort of dead man's shoes, not quite as bad as dead man's shoes. What we've done and used the Competency Framework to do is to identify what the job responsibilities actually are, what the competencies are, and we've put a situation that we call progression in Poole, where people, as long as once a year they get the opportunity to prove their level of competence at potentially the level above where they are, or potentially 2 levels above where they are, as long as they are able to evidence their competence against what they are delivering. So if they are working at a higher level, delivering at that higher level, then the organisation will actually allow them to put evidence forward. That can be evidence, and if they can actually show that they are, in actual fact, working at the next level above, they're allowed to progress. The business link within that is they can only progress to the level at which we actually need, or the organisation actually needs people to reach. And that depends on which level you're actually in. And engineering being the prime one is the one that people can actually progress the most in. So that's a way that we can actually use the competencies directly, and also begin to reward people, because with that progression comes extra money, and we can actually reward people for their level of competence. And again, that is another practical way in which we've actually used these. But the job description includes the structural, whether it's a structural or whether it's a pool post, what the grade is, the responsibilities, and the responsibilities in terms of delivery support, business development, corporate governance. And we used on the previous slides the details that were there, and it actually described delivery support on the job description, and that's all we do, because so that the people know at a relatively high level exactly what it is that they're there to do. And then the final part of the job description is what I call the competency footprint. And I use the term footprint because the original competency set is in effect what the organisation needs. And what individuals are able to do by using this is to place themselves on that organisational footprint so that they're able to see what their competencies actually relate to the business. And what it's possible to do then is to more clearly identify the competency gaps and the process gaps so that you can focus that learning and development. So that's a sort of job description and how those are actually described. As far as thinking about the processes and the phases, the definition phase is about defining the purpose of the organisation and the department and the job in terms of what it's there for and what processes it uses and what its competencies are. As far as the development part is concerned, it's where, having done all of that and having front-loaded so you're very, very clear what the organisation needs, is to assess individuals' ability to deliver against their job. Can they do it? Can't they do it? Identify if there's surpluses and you've got some extra skills, can they be used in other parts of the organisation to bring about effective development? Identify those gaps, design and implement a development plan. And the experience tells me that if you actually look at the processes rather than the competencies, it becomes real to them and they can actually see that they are developing their ability to carry out the processes that are required for their job rather than just developing those competencies. So again, we come back to that alignment and bringing it all together. And then the review box at the top is about, okay, how well has it worked? Has the capability and the capacity changed? Do we actually need to change it in any terms? And feed that back into the define phase. And what that brings is it brings the whole organisation together. When you've communicated that, people understand what the organisation is about far more, people work together far more effectively. And experience has told me that you really do get engagement. I'm not saying we're there yet, but people really do understand it. And over the last 12 months, if we think about the progression in Poole process, feeding all of this into the PFDR process, people are now using core competencies. They understand what they are. They are using all of the other professional skills, competencies, and they are understanding what they are and seeing that they are relevant. So very recently I went to talk to some engineering labs and they got it. Instead of telling me to go and stuff my head in a bucket because I was talking rubbish, they actually could see some of the relevance of it. And again, we're not there yet, but we're getting far more engagement and people being able to see what they're there for than I would have thought potentially possible. We've only been doing this for 12 months, which is, in terms of doing this, is a relatively short period of time. Success will probably be about 3 years, 2 to 3 years, I think, by the time people are fully engaged with this. So if you're thinking about doing this work, you need to think about how long it's going to take. That really shows what we're actually aiming at. Job descriptions, incorporating processes in terms of development. You've got the individual at the bottom and the organisation at the top. And I think that's what certainly I'm aiming at with the organisation that I've got, so that there is a direct link up and down, so that everybody within the organisation understands everybody else, and you get that link. Now, that if we achieve that, then that really is would be sort of nirvana. But I believe we're a long way down the line for that. And again, I think it's about using competencies to deliver skills that the organisation actually needs. And gaining that engagement is crucial. And I guess I'm here to say, if you go through and adapt the processes or the process that Andy described to fit your own organisation and to meet your own marketplace, I believe it is possible to get a long way towards that. As far as benefits are concerned, the skill sets cover all the competencies and skills required to meet business need. This whole thing is driven by business need. You provide clear job descriptions, provide the basis for professional development, provide a mechanism for progression based on developing competencies, competitive selection for structural posts. You can actually provide staff with clear career paths, because within each one of those families there is a clear career path, and so people know what they have to do. And all of the jobs have now got a job description, so the entire organisation is visible. So people can actually plan their development, plan their skills, because they know the job purpose and the competency footprint for every job across the site, which is a boon to help the manager member of staff conversation that Andy talked about in his presentation. That gives real credence to that, because it gives you something to talk about. It also sorts out equality of opportunity, and it supports the future development and expansion of the organisation, because the whole thing is actually linked. I was going to finish the slide by saying, given this model in place, how can a trainer interact with a business to enable sustainable organisation performance to occur? But we're 5 minutes to go, and I know there's some questions. I hope what I've done is provided a sort of real-time example of how this can actually work. And I'll gladly talk to anybody and give any further details afterwards. And please feel free to contact me on stevepoole@enrichingpeople.co.uk. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions? Just at the front.
Steve, you mentioned you had on the left-hand side all the different models, like the ADM's Competence Framework and the SFIA. What did you do in the end then? Did you end up with one competency model for the entire organisation, or did you end up with different competency models for different job types?
What was on the left of that slide was in effect the organisational competency footprint, which we have some project managers, we have people who work in facilities management. And what the job descriptions actually do is take a pick and mix from those various different skills frameworks to provide an individual or a job or a department skills footprint. So we use them all, but the important part about it is we didn't go from scratch. We used the professional frameworks. So take, for example, the PPM framework. I think that PPM framework has got something like 45 to 50 competencies. 47. We've used 10 of them because that actually fits our need. And we've done that with all of the others. And so what we have is a competency framework that fits the organisation, made up of that complete set.
If I'm in catering, I won't end up looking at those 10 competencies because you will have given me something else related.
Yes, because I would be describing the competency footprint that you need to carry out your particular job.
Can I just respond to that? What's key, actually, in the end, the competencies are used in anger, as it were, against the role profile. So it doesn't actually matter, in answer to your previous question, or right at the outset, which framework they come from. They're used in anger against a role profile. What is quite key is not to have the same competency defined in more than one framework. That you don't have overlapping frameworks, because then you start to lose some of the value of having this common dictionary of skills and competencies that you can use across the organisation. You can use multiple.
The reason I was asking is that I was going back to the point you made in your presentation about can the organisation understand what its overall competency is. I was just trying to see whether that's why you were using one model or multiple, but therefore you would report back to the organisation that it has a strength in certain of these competencies.
Yes.
Sorry.
And that would work as long as you don't have multiple versions of the same competency.
There's a question at the back. Over there.
Yeah, I just had a question. I spent about 7 years working in an organisation that focused very heavily on strength-based rather than competency-based, and based on a lot of research and work that the Gallup organisation did, and there are a couple of explanations like come across this. One called first wave models and the other called now Painted Strengths. I just wondered what your experiences have been in working in organisations that have a preference to focus on strengths as opposed to purely competencies.
For me, I think the frameworks enable people to identify their strengths more clearly. They're able to describe why they are strong at doing a particular job, and it gives that detail that I guess enables them to sell themselves better, both with the organisation. If they can identify that, the organisation can use their strengths far more effectively, and if they use their strengths, they feel motivated and more engaged with the organisation.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily distinguish between the two. If the competency framework is well designed and the competencies are well designed using some of the principles that we've considered, then the degree of proficiency actually tells us whether a person is strong, and we can also benchmark that against what is required of their particular role as well.
Okay, I guess a sort of follow-up question to that is then, as a learning and development professional, linking into competency and a strength-based approach, the difference between focusing on fixing weaknesses as opposed to managing around weakness and developing
I think, as Andy said, it enables people you to identify what your strengths and what your less strengths actually are, and perhaps begin to ask the question of individuals who might have aspirations to go in one particular direction as to whether that is going to be realistic for them, and perhaps for their managers to work with them and suggest alternatives or other parts of other ways that they could actually go. Because I think one thing that competency is capable, this work is capable of enabling, is for people to be realistic about their achievements and plan their development so that they can focus on what they want to do, where they want to be, and put forward a development plan that is meaningful and stands a very good chance of taking them to where they want to go to.
Well, one last question, I think.
In fact, I have two questions, but one is probably a simple one. It is both lectures to Andy and Steve. I noticed that you use competencies and capabilities interchangeably. So sometimes you say that define competencies, develop, and then assess your whatever, yeah? So review capabilities. So is there any differences between the two? Because my experience was that when it is leadership, we use capability, when it is functional, it is competency. And my second question would be probably to Andy, because you spoke about change management and how important it is to do it quickly rather than make it ideally, yeah, and then launch it. So would you still recommend to launch competencies or the holistic approach when you have everything? Role profiles, competencies, learning portfolio left to it, certification and other things. So the holistic loop, or would you go with the competency framework?
Yeah, it's a good question. Shall I take the latter one first? I think it depends on what the point of pain is that you're looking to address. I mean, if you're talking about, for instance, the pilot project, then you want to provide just business justification as quickly as possible. And so it depends on the point of pain that you're looking to address. If the point of pain relates to non-functional competencies, then maybe the idea is that you focus on those and you get that pilot project running quickly with those competencies. If it relates to functional competencies, technical competencies, then you focus on those. So I think the idea with the pilot project is to try and get a win, to show the value within the organisation as quickly as possible, but at the same time recognise that you need to do the right things in terms of communicating what you're doing to the organisation so that people understand what's in it for them, as I put it earlier. The problem is that if you don't do that, putting ourselves in their shoes, they look at this programme that's heading their way, they're being asked to assess themselves, particularly in view of the current economic climate. People are thinking, what does this mean? You know, so you need to do the right things in terms of communication marketing, but with your pilot project, focus on the things that are going to get you the quickest results. You can prove business justification for what you're doing.
Thanks, Andy. And a quick last word from Steve?
Yeah, as far as the capability is concerned, when I talked about the progression in Poole process, we had a very long form that basically asked people to prove their ability to deliver in terms of their capability, and also assess them or give evidence of their competence on the same form. The forms were massive. One thing we have actually learnt, though, is to think about what the job actually involves in terms of individuals' capability, and certainly for that progression in Poole, we actually got them to actually, instead of replying hugely against their competencies, we wanted them to demonstrate their competency ability against the responsibilities and the capability of the job, and that actually worked very well, directing very much to their ability to deliver using competencies to describe how they did it.
Thank you, Stephen. And before the last round of applause, I have a couple of messages for you. First of all, remember that next is the champagne reception. Don't miss that. That's out there. And also make sure you pick up your ticket if you're planning to go to the Learning and Skills Party, because you won't be allowed in without one. And tomorrow morning we begin at 9:45 again, when Dom will do the opening and address. Steve Poole and Andy Andrews, thank you very much.